For today's video, I'll be going over some of the main advantages of using Indian almond leaves in aquariums. The more I researched these, the more I realised just how beneficial they can actually be due to their unique ratios of different acids and compounds that offer a wide range of advantages that a lot of other sources can struggle to provide. So I want to start with using Indian almond leaves for water conditioning, specifically reducing the pH, GH and KH in our tanks. Indian almond leaves release tannic, humic and fulvic acids into the water, which makes them surprisingly effective for people dealing with hard alkaline tap water. Personally, this isn't a big issue for me because my tap water is already soft with an acidic pH. But I was recently chatting with Jay from JDA Betters, who I'll link to in the description because he has some absolutely beautiful tanks and he really knows his stuff when it comes to planted setups. Jay lives in Bangkok, where most of the tap water is on the harder side. He sent me some clips from JJ's market showing vendors selling bottled water that's been pre-soaked in with Indian almond leaves. He was telling me how people in Bangkok often use these bottles as an affordable, effective way to soften their water and make it more acidic, perfect for certain species of fish, shrimp and plants. As always, I've linked to all of the research papers in the footnotes of the article that I link in the description. One research paper that I found on Indian almond leaves noticed that they were able to lower the pH of their test tanks as low as 5.5 with the right concentration. Another research paper found that they were able to reduce the water hardness by as much as 37.5%. And the way I read that paper was if they were talking about both the general hardness and the carbonate hardness in the water as a single metric. Now I'll try not to be too geeky here, but this is how it works. The various acids released from the Indian almond leaves release excess hydrogen ions into the water. In a soft water tank this really doesn't do much, but in a hard alkaline aquarium those excess hydrogen ions will first react with the carbonate buffering system or your carbonate hardness, forming more carbonic acid and CO2, lowering the carbonate hardness level in the tank. Once the carbonate hardness level has been reduced enough, the remaining hydrogen ions shift the hydrogen to hydroxide ratio in your tank, making it more acidic and lowering your pH level. On top of that, while these reactions are taking place, other atoms and compounds from the tannic, humic and fulvic acid can also bind with calcium and magnesium in your water, which will passively reduce the general hardness. But the more I looked into this, the more I realised just how affordable and effective this can be when used correctly. Now moving on with the video, and I want to talk about the antibacterial and antifungal properties of Indian almond leaves, but I do want to quickly clarify something first. For this specific section of the video, some of the research papers that I read did specifically point out that it's not just the tannins that are playing a role here. They also noted that the alkaloids and the saponins released from the leaves also contribute significantly to both antibacterial and antifungal benefits. I just wanted to stress that because it is important to realise that most popular sources of tannins in the hobby that we use, such as driftwood, soil, seed pods, alder cones and things like that, only release tannins, not these other beneficial compounds. In fact, the only other commonly used botanicals in the hobby that I could find research backing up their alkaloid and saponin content were mulberry leaves and guava leaves. Anyway, getting back on topic, and one research paper in lab conditions did find that the acids from Indian almond leaves were able to effectively combat 8 different common pathogenic bacteria in the hobby when it was tested in petri dishes in a lab. But it is worth noting that that same research paper also said when tested on live fish they only saw benefits against one of those bacteria strains. On top of that, it's also worth noting across all datasets in that specific research paper, they found that red Indian almond leaves, which had naturally matured on the tree and then fallen off, outperformed the green Indian almond leaves, which are prematurely picked to be sold in the hobby. Even then though, the green Indian almond leaves did still show some benefit against certain types of bacteria. I also came across one specific paper on the antifungal effects of Indian almond leaves in fish. This specific study took 54 goldfish and split them into different test and control groups and every single test group in this research paper showed a significant antifungal improvement. I also found some non-fish specific research on humans and terrestrial animals that found the acids from Indian almond leaves were effective against all 3 of the fungal infections tested in that paper. So this does lead me to think that there can be some real benefits for fungal infections from these because it was a 100% hit rate across 2 different research papers. So moving on from antibacterial and antifungal benefits, and I found 4 different research papers, 3 of them specific to fish and 1 of them specific to shrimp, that found that the acids from Indian almond leaves were able to increase both survival rates and the growth rates of fry and shrimplets. Now it is difficult to pin down the exact reason why this was happening in all 4 of these research papers, but I do think that the antimicrobial properties I mentioned earlier can help protect the baby fish and shrimp directly by making sure they don't get any bacterial or fungal infections. There was also one other research paper that was a little spotty on how the acids from these leaves were able to help prevent fungus forming on angelfish eggs and help increase the survival rate of the eggs too. Touching on another previous point, the actual changes in water conditioning I mentioned with the pH, GH and KH can also be at play here. That's because a lot of species in the wild do seem to prefer softer, more acidic water, especially for their young, so matching those conditions in your tank might be a reason they had higher hatch rates, faster growth rates and higher survival rates. Then there's also the angle of ammonia management too. The majority of liquid test kits in the hobby measure total ammonia nitrogen, which includes both toxic ammonia and the far less toxic ammonium. It puts both of these readings into a single metric and usually only gives you a hit on your test kit when it gets a reading of 0.25 ppm or above. Unfortunately, it has been suggested that as little as 0.05 ppm of ammonia in your water, which isn't detectable by a standard liquid test kit, can be enough to cause gill damage on your fish and potentially lead to further more serious issues. And here's how the Indian almond leaves may be able to help with this, because the acids I mentioned earlier release the excess hydrogen ions into the water. Those hydrogen ions then bind with the toxic ammonia and convert it into the far less toxic ammonium. The lower the pH of our aquarium, the more excess hydrogen ions there are, so the stronger the ammonia to ammonium ratio shifts in our favour, helping to keep our fish safe if there is an accidental toxic ammonia spike. So if you do have tiny little baby fry or shrimplets in your tank at their development stages, it's just another layer of protection offered by these Indian almond leaves, especially if you have harder alkaline tap water. Moving on, and we get to using Indian almond leaves as shrimp food, and this is actually the main way that I currently use them in my own fish room. Unlike some other popular shrimp foods in the hobby that don't have much research, if any, behind them, several studies have found that adding Indian almond leaves to the diet of various species of shrimp can help boost their immune systems, increase resistance to certain diseases, and improve the growth and survival rates of baby shrimplets. Now, it's worth pointing out that these research papers weren't specific to any of the more common species of shrimp in the hobby, but because there were advantages observed across all of the tested species of shrimp, I do think it's safe to presume that it will carry over to things like Neocaridina or cherry shrimp, as well as Armano shrimp and some of the other more popular species in the hobby too. In the clips you're watching now, it's basically me just documenting how long it took for my cherry shrimp colony in one of my tanks to break down and eat the Indian almond leaves, and in total it took just over 9 weeks. Now this is far longer than usual, actually more than double, but that's because I did add a larger piece of the Indian almond leaf to use as a food just to make it easier to document. On top of that, Indian almond leaves also have a thicker waxy cuticle layer compared to something like oak or mulberry leaves, which I use a lot too, so my shrimp can eat those a lot faster than an Indian almond leaf. Now I do want to clarify, you don't need to have a big piece of leaf right in the front of your tank like I do here. This is just to make it easier for me to record and document for a video. Normally I just cut them down into smaller sections and then tuck them behind plants or hardscape in the tank. This lets the shrimp still get easy access and eat them as they see fit, but it doesn't spoil the view of the aquarium. And as the shrimp eat the leaves, they still release the beneficial acids and oils into the aquarium, offering the other benefits that I've mentioned throughout the video. So not only are you giving your shrimp an extra food source, but you're also giving them some extra health and water conditioning benefits that I've mentioned earlier. Finally, I want to talk about how to actually use Indian almond leaves in your aquarium, because I have had a few questions about this. The most common question I get by far about any of the botanicals that I use is where I actually get them. I've always bought mine from independent sellers on both Etsy and eBay, and I usually switch between the specific seller depending on who offers the cheapest leaves when I actually need them, because prices fluctuate a lot. If you do prefer going with a bigger brand, I will drop affiliate links in the video description for some of the new Seachem Indian Almond Leaf products on the market. The Seachem Catappa Leaf Small Batch is great for a shrimp food, and that's its main focus. There's also the Seachem Catappa Leaf Medium, which is designed for both water parameter management, fish health, and as a shrimp food. And then there's the Seachem Catappa tea bags, which are basically crushed up Indian almond leaves in small tea bags, and you can use them for tweaking your water chemistry, offering medical benefits, or as a food source depending on how you use them in your tank. Again though, I've never used any of those three products. I've always got mine from independent sellers on Etsy and eBay, and I have never had an issue with them. Now, I do know some people who boil their Indian almond leaves before adding them to their tank to reduce the risk of pathogens. While I did used to do this myself a few years back, I haven't boiled my Indian almond leaves before use for at least a year now, and as far as I can tell, I haven't had any issues either. As I mentioned earlier, I usually just cut small sections of the leaf out so I can hide it behind plants or hardscape in my tank so it doesn't really ruin the view. But the more botanical heavy and leaflet aquascaping style does seem to be becoming more popular in the hobby, so if you have something like that, you can easily leave this anywhere on the bottom of your tank and it'll fit right in with your aquascape. Although they're not available in my area, as I mentioned earlier, Jay over in Bangkok says it's quite easy just to buy the pre-bottled Indian almond leaf acids mixed with water over there, so in other countries that might be a viable option too. But remember, buying those pre-bottled solutions are mainly for the medicinal and water conditioning benefits. It's not really used as a shrimp food because I don't think the leaves are actually in there. The actual steeping process is done before it's bottled. And just to quickly touch on the yellow to brown hue that these can add to your tanks, because that will depend on the specific ratios of acids in your setup. But you can use products like Purigen to remove these colours from your water if it does start to annoy you. Unfortunately, it is difficult to know which benefits remain and which ones are removed if you do that. It does seem that the water conditioning and shrimp food benefits will remain, but it is difficult to know if any of the medical benefits to your fish and shrimp will remain if you actually use Purigen to lock up all those tannin acids. Anyway guys, that brings the video to an end. I hope it's been helpful. Thanks for watching and good luck using Indian almond leaves in your aquariums. I do actually think that I'll start using them more and more after doing the research for this video.